Hey everybody, welcome to the latest edition of the Fortress of Rock with me, your host, the Maestro Kevin Crane. Glad to have you aboard. The weather's turning. Beautiful day in northern Indiana yesterday. Temps in the 70s. Of course, today we're back to rain and cloudiness and misery, but hopefully winter is done. The sun will start shining. The grass will start growing. Rock bands will be out touring. Of course, that's what we care about. That's what we ultimately care about here on the Fortress of Rock. So, as always, segment one here on the 18th of March, 2022, is about the news of the rock world. Biggest news of the week. Def Leppard posted a mysterious countdown clock on a website, DiamondStarHalos.com. That countdown clock got to 0 yesterday. Not a ton of drama. We all knew it meant new music of some sort. So now it's official. Diamond Star Halos is the name of the upcoming new album from Def Leppard, coming out May the 27th. The first single has been released, Kick. We'll review that for you next week here on the Fortress of Rock. Always good to hear new stuff from Def Leppard. Now, I will be honest, as much as I love Def Leppard, I don't think their last few albums have been quite as sharp, quite as good as, of course, their heyday back in the 80s. But, as we always say here, we take what we can get. I do like what I'm hearing from the band in interviews, how they talk about they keep striving to be up there with Led Zeppelin and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. They admit they'll never get there, but they're going to keep trying. That's the kind of attitude you like to hear from these bands. So, when we get to see them, along with Motley Crue, Joan Jett, and Poison in August, we'll have that review for you. We'll obviously have some new Def Leppard music, not only to review at the end of May, but live in concert in August. Now, here's where I'm going to go off on my rant for the week. As we move on to the class act of all time, one of the smartest women in music, Dolly Parton finally figured out what we all knew and what a lot of these other acts throughout the last 10 or 20 years and acts and singers who are in competition for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame this year should know: you're not rock and roll. Now, I was not happy with her a couple months ago when Dolly said, well, if I get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, then I'll make a rock and roll album. And I said, that's backwards. That's not the way it's supposed to work. I think Dolly got it. And again, she is so shrewd. She is so smart as a performer, an intelligent woman with an unbelievable mind for business and public relations. She withdrew her name from consideration for this year's vote for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And immediately Nancy Wilson of Heart came out and praised her, said everything that I've been saying, that a lot of my friends, my peers have been saying. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame should either fracture and split or they should change their name and have different wings, different halls within the overall museum in Cleveland, Ohio. And Nancy Wilson, again, another smart, intelligent rock and roll woman who gets it, offered to help Dolly put together that rock and roll album that Parton was talking about a couple months ago. God bless Dolly Parton. God bless Nancy Wilson. And I'm not religious, but you know what I mean. Two people who get it, two women who understand it. But of course, the idiots, the morons, the sycophants who run the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame just came out and said, we will not honor Dolly Parton's wishes. We will continue to keep her on the ballot in consideration for the Rock Hall of Fame because we know what rock and roll is, we know what music is, and everybody else doesn't. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what those morons said. Sykes and Wenner, just like everything else in this world, like politics, like Hollywood, we always gravitate to letting the morons and the idiots run things and then tell the smarter people who were too smart to take the leadership positions because they knew they'd have to sell their souls to get there. They end up telling the smarter ones down below what to do, how to do it, when to do it, and why to do it. Now, in the end, could this end up being the biggest, smartest public relations ploy of all time on Dolly Parton's behalf? Is she going to draw sympathy? We all know the fan vote means nothing, which, again, we've talked about this. We'll wait, rant and rave about that once we get to the final 5 nominees, once they're actually put into the Rock Hall of Fame. But I can't believe that out of Dolly Parton. I don't think this is a stunt. She was already in the top 5 in the fan vote. And again, the fan vote doesn't mean crap. It's a delusion. It's an illusion. It's 0.1% when it comes to ballots for putting people in the Rock Hall of Fame. This is the first year where I have ever cared enough. And I know, again, it doesn't matter, but for some reason, some part of me feels like I have to make a statement, even though, again, it doesn't mean anything statistically. It's insignificant statistically. But I have tried every day, ever since fan voting opened, to put 5 people in, 5 bands and performers in, because I'm tired of it. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of this ugly monstrosity that Jan Wenner and now Sykes have perpetrated on the rock and roll community. So I have been voting for Judas Priest. I have been voting for Pat Benatar. I have been voting for the MC5. I have been voting for the New York Dolls. And I have been voting yes for Duran Duran. Every day. Every day. It does not change. I vote for those 5 performers every day. I don't expect the MC5 to get in. I don't expect the New York Dolls to get in. I'm expecting Pat Benatar to get in, and I'm hoping Judas Priest gets in. Now, Duran Duran is running away with the fan vote now. Over the last month, they have passed Eminem and are destroying it. But again, that doesn't mean anything. You've got to deal with the performers, the rock critics. Again, people that don't think like you and me. They'll find a way to put Rage Against the Machine in, if not this year, soon enough. They'll find a way to put Beck in soon enough. Because again, they're all sycophants. They're all hipster doofuses who think they know better than the true fans like you and me, and they don't. So, like I said, I'm not expecting miracles. Pat Benatar should damn well get in this year, and I would hope Judas Priest. Beyond that, I guess I'll take what I can get. Just news today, broke just a few hours ago. Netflix is developing a series about U2. Not a documentary. This is actually going to be something like Bohemian Rhapsody or Rocket Man. This will be a dramatic interpretation of the rise of the band. I guess that's the best way to put it. I'll watch it, but I'll tell you, I am not a big fan. I'd rather watch documentaries about the bands than watch Hollywood actors and actresses try to interpret the lives of these people, these performers that we grew up with, that we idolize, that we love. Again, Hollywood will botch it somehow. Now, Bohemian Rhapsody was great. Rami Malek, fantastic as Freddie Mercury. Rocket Man was okay. Taron Egerton was fine as Elton John, but again, that one was a little bit more of a fantasy slash biopic, whereas Bohemian Rhapsody was more of a straightforward biography. We've got Bob Marley biopics coming out. We've got Keith Moon. I think Sex Pistols, that might be an FX series. I'm not 100%, but something about the Sex Pistols is coming out because, of course, John Lydon, aka Johnny Rotten, is upset about it, but he gets upset in the morning when he wakes up. I just don't get the U2 appeal. I never have. I love their music to a point, and they're never going to dispute the fact that the Joshua Tree is one of the most influential rock albums of the past 40 years. Never would I dispute that. It's overplayed, just like AC/DC's Back in Black, just like Def Leppard's Hysteria. Personally, for me, I'd rather listen to Achtung Baby or The Unforgettable Fire. And then, of course, they went into there, and we've talked about this before, so I'll get through this quickly. I'm sorry. Zooropa, Pop, just garbage, wastes of time. betrayals when it comes to their diehard fans. Oh, the diehard fans are supposed to accept whatever they do whenever they do it. That's not true. I've talked about this in the past with Metallica. You could even bring Van Halen, my favorite band, into the mix on this, and how people despise Van Halen 3 with Gary Cherone, the one album where he sang lead. I personally think it's a great album. I think it's better than the last piece of crap they put out with Sammy Hagar, Balance. But other people will fight me on that. Even Wolfgang Van Halen says that he thinks Balance is one of the better Van Halen albums ever, including David Lee Roth's 7 classic albums. Yes, and I am counting a different kind of truth in there. But I don't know, can the U2 story really be made out to be that compelling? I have my doubts. I really have my doubts. Bono is so pretentious and so arrogant. How do you make him a likable character? The other 3 members are always in the background, always quiet, always in the shadows. This is not like a Beatles biopic or a Motley Crue biopic. Yeah, I'm talking about The Dirt. At least all 4 members had some semblance of separate identities and separate drama. We all kind of knew what was going on with all 4 of the main band members. And we're talking about Motley Crue, and we're not comparing Motley Crue to U2. Obviously, on a global scale, U2 far superior, far more popular than Motley Crue. But just think about your favorite band. How much do you really know about them? How much do you really care to know about their personal lives? There are certain musical movies, biopics, that I will see and some I will not. I will not go see Bob Marley. I just mentioned that one. Paramount just announced that that's a go, and they gave it a release date. I believe it's in early 2024. I don't care about Bob Marley. What is it going to be? 2 hours of him smoking a bowl? I know there's people out there that will probably be in line on Thursday night when they do the preview showings to see it. Good for you. I would be there same way if they did Van Halen. I get it. But to me, like Van Halen, even being biased as a Van Halen fan, Van Halen's story would be more interesting than I think U2's will be. But of course, U2, the pretentious healers of the world, Bono, the arrogant jackass that he is, they appeal to the West Coast, the Hollywood elites. I'm still surprised to this day that they made The Dirt. I know it went straight to Netflix. It was popular on Netflix. But that's not the story that Hollywood wants. As much as behind the scenes they love the debauchery, the sex, the drugs, the violence, outwardly they want to be shown as the healers. We love everybody equally. We don't condone misogyny. We don't condone racism, sexism, homophobia. We love the world. We are the world. They're hypocrites. America is a repressed society. That's why they would rather show the story of U2, as boring and melodramatic as it's going to end up being, instead of a story about Van Halen, Judas Priest, because that's not who they are anymore. That's not who Hollywood is. Really, that's not who Hollywood has ever been. Remember, they hate flyover country, and flyover country, basically, from Western Pennsylvania all the way through to Eastern Nevada, Hollywood dismisses. And guess what? Ever since the mid 70s, flyover country is who has propped up bands like REO Speedwagon, Journey, Motley Crue, Van Halen, Ted Nugent. We're the true rock and roll fans. Sorry if I'm pissing off people on the West Coast or the East Coast. And I know the East Coast, I'll give them a little bit of their credit, a little bit of their due. They've had Bon Jovi, they've had Cinderella, they've had Springsteen. So you guys kind of know what I'm talking about, but the West Coast doesn't. I'm sorry. I know the Sunset Strip, the Whiskey A Go Go, Gazzari's, all those places gave birth to these great rock and roll bands from the 80s that I'm talking about. But when it came time to sell the records, it was Illinois, it was Ohio, it was Indiana, it was Michigan, it was Wisconsin who were buying the albums. All right, we talked about Greta Van Fleet last week, and I guess we got lucky as we tape this here on the 22nd, the 18th of March 2022. It's been 8 days since we saw the opening night of the Greta Van Fleet Dreams in Gold tour, and now they are having issues. Thankfully, not COVID, but again, health issues, which is not good. Two of the brothers in the band, Jake and Josh Kitska, have both come down with pneumonia. So they have had to postpone 3 dates here at the beginning of the tour. The guitarist, his case is worse. He had to actually be hospitalized, where the lead singer, milder symptoms. Of course, we wish them the best, even though, of course, last week's review was not the most positive in the world from the Maestro. And now there are hints, even though there was no new music that they played last week when I saw them, that they could have a third album out by the time they go out on their fall leg of this tour. So that'll be interesting. I would think it'd have to be done. It would have to be already in the can and getting final production and engineering, because they're not going to have a lot of time to record between the first leg and the second leg here of the 2022 tour. And it's still weird to me with Greta Van Fleet how we can't count their most popular, the EP, as an album. With Safari Song and Highway Tune, we can't count that as an actual album, even though that is by far and away what launched them into the stratosphere. A couple of tributes to two people who have passed away recently in the rock world. Heard about this, didn't get a lot of publicity. The band really only had one big album, but I still own it and I still listen to it every once in a while. Sponge, Rotting Pinata, Mike Cross, one of the original members of Sponge, passed away here recently. Heard about it on the radio, traveling to the Greta Van Fleet concert. Otherwise, I would not have known about this. So, thoughts and prayers to the Sponge family. And if you've never heard Rotting Pinata, check it out. It is a solid album. Really good album. And then a band from the 70s that I always liked a lot, Atlanta Rhythm Section. The guitarist for ARS, Barry Bailey, passed away. I'm not going to tell you to go out and dig into their catalog and buy every one of their albums, but pick up their greatest hits or just call it up on Spotify and listen to it. Imaginary Lover, So Into You. They have got about 8 or 10 really, really good songs. If you've never listened to Atlanta Rhythm Section, give them a chance. Great, great, underrated band from the 70s. And then finally here, wrapping up news of the world. Couple of tours that have been announced, one overseas. The Rolling Stones are still going. They are still trudging along. They've actually said they're wrapping up work on a new album. Of course, Steve Jordan is now their drummer after Charlie Watts passed away. They have scheduled 14 dates in the UK and Europe in stadiums over there. Of course, we know what's going on overseas, so we'll see. Hold our breath. See if they can actually make these dates happen without putting themselves in any kind of jeopardy. Who knows what the world is going to be like here in another 3 or 4 months. Over here in the US, they are vying for a spot in the latest class of inductees for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We've talked about them. Duran Duran are going on a 14-date US tour in August and September. I believe Chic, the awesome 70s disco band fronted by Niles Rodgers, is the opening act. That could be fun. I can probably tell you I'm not going to make it because the tour's not coming anywhere really close to where I am, where I could go see them. Of course, it's, again, only 14 dates. So that really limits everybody from the West Coast to the East Coast in going to see Duran Duran. But if you get a chance, check them out. I think they have a pretty decent shot of getting into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And we'll save discussions on Duran Duran for another day. Once they announce the inductees, we'll discuss in depth the performers that made it in and the ones that didn't. Coming up on segment 2, we're reviewing The Tipping Point from Tears for Fears and new music from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Jack White, and Joe Satriani. So hang out here with me on the Fortress of Rock. I'm the Maestro, Kevin Crane, doing a quick promo, and we'll be right back. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Fortress of Rock podcast with me, the Maestro, Kevin Crane. Of course, that was segment 1, the news of the world, our tribute to Freddie Mercury and Queen. where we look back at the past week in rock and roll and all the news and all the controversies that you deserve to know about. Next up is the heart of the show, the meat and potatoes breakdown, where we are going to review all the new songs, all the new albums, all the new concert tours, the shows that I've seen personally. Stay tuned for that. Of course, we're now available on Spotify, Anchor, Apple, Stitcher, Castbox, Google, Pocket Cast, and Radio Public, wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Hang out, kids. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning back into the Fortress of Rock with the Maestro Kevin Crane. Available now almost anywhere you listen to fine podcasts, including Spotify, Anchor, Google, Radio Public, Pocket Cast, Breaker, Apple, Overcast, Castbox, and Stitcher. Segment 2, as always, each and every week. New episodes hitting every Friday night. Breakdown, our tribute to Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. I would argue the most important segment each and every week, because this is where we review new music for you. We tell you new stuff out there, what to listen to, what to stay away from. But again, the most important part is new music, something new to listen to. You don't have to listen to Pour Some Sugar on Me or Freebird anymore. Well, you should, but only once every couple months. Let's face it, you and I have listened to those songs hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of times. We need to check out some new stuff. So our album review for the week is Tears for Fears, The Tipping Point. We have been reviewing songs, singles, releases off this album over the last 3 or 4 months. The album is finally out. First album from Tears for Fears in nearly 18 years. 10 songs. Of course, as always, we will go through track by track. First up, No Small Thing. We've reviewed this song in the past on The Fortress. Very solid, very good song. Along with the second song, The Tipping Point, the title track. At this point, I want to let you guys know that's 2 of the 3 songs that we've already reviewed here on The Fortress. And while we're giving them positive reviews, I'm going to tell you right now, spoiler alert for the rest of the album. There's about half of the songs on this album are good, but if you're expecting Shout or Head Over Heels or one of my personal all-time favorite songs, Everybody Wants to Rule the World, you're not going to get it here. So basically what I'm telling you is we've reviewed 2 songs, No Small Thing and The Tipping Point. Those are probably 2 of your 3 or 4 standout tracks here. And while they're good, you're not getting anything earth-shattering or groundbreaking here. Because then we get into song 3, Long, Long, Long Time. And this is the first song on this album that really kind of let me know that Tears for Fears has pretty much left behind almost any semblance or shade of them trying to be a rock band, because this sounds like music for meditation, elevator music. It's just boring. It's really just boring. It's not the worst song I've ever heard, but it's really not anything special. Now, what happens with songs 4 and 5, though, we've talked about Break the Man, which could be the best song on the album, track 4. And then track 5, My Demons, was the first song outside of the 3 previous releases that we've just discussed. My Demons was the first song that I had not heard before, where I said, all right, this is good stuff. It's cynical, sarcastic, a little bit of an edge to it. Probably the closest to a rock song you're going to get off the Tipping Point. So now we're looking at 4 of the first 5 songs are really good. At this point, I'm optimistic. But I'm also looking at the album going, but I also had heard 3 songs going in and they're already burned. They're already done. So I have to depend on all these new songs on the second half of the album being either sleeper picks, better quality than I would expect from deep album cuts from Tears for Fears. Unfortunately, not much on the second half of the album to really get excited about. Track 6, Rivers of Mercy, is just like long time. Boring, boring, boring. Then it gets worse with Please Be Happy, track 7. Master Plan, track 8, is a little better. Now, Tears for Fears have professed their love for the Beatles, how the Beatles have influenced them for the last 40 years. Master Plan is the one song on this album where you can clearly hear the Beatles' influence on Kurt Smith and Roland Orthobell. So it's not bad. Master Plan is not bad. Same can be said for track 9, End of Night. Pretty good. But again, not great. Nothing that jumps out at you. I could see Master Plan and End of Night if I listen to this album, give it another 3 or 4 spins. Maybe they'll grow on me, but I still don't see it affecting my overall review because then we get to the final track. Track 10, Stay, is the worst song on the album by a mile. And keep in mind, I've already downgraded Please Be Happy, Rivers of Mercy, and long time. And Stay is worse. Boring beyond belief. And I'm not saying every song in the world has to rock. Every song in the world has to have a great guitar hook. I'm fine with mellow stuff. My friends get into Disturbed and Five Finger Death Punch, which I can't stand. So I'm considered the mellow person in the group. So I'm telling you from that perspective, from that standpoint, that even I can't stand how boringly low key about half of the Tipping Point is. I can't recommend it. I just can't. I wish I could tell you to go out and buy. I want you to buy the CDs or the vinyl editions on these albums if I recommend them, because that's the only way the artists are really getting a fair share, like it was back in the 80s and the 90s, especially the 80s, where album sales, CD sales, cassette sales actually put money in the pockets of these performers. Yeah, they get a little bit of chunk of change if you play it on Spotify. But I'm also not going to tell you to go out and spend $11, $12 on the CD or $20, $25 on the vinyl if the album's not worth it. And unfortunately, the tipping point is not worth it. All right, so moving on. I have decided over the break, I'm going to hold off one more week on reviewing Joe Satriani's Faceless. I thought I had listened to it enough where I could give you a fair review. I think I need to listen to it one or two more times. Again, it's Joe Satriani. It's going to be basically 3.5 minutes of guitar work. But I like to be fair. And looking at my notes, I don't have enough confidence in my review yet to say that's my final definitive word on Faceless. So we'll hold off on that for one more week. We'll move on to Red Hot Chili Peppers' Poster Child, the second release from their upcoming album, Unlimited Love. And I know I've talked about the Chili Peppers here over the past couple weeks. We reviewed Black Summer. Positive review. But here's my problem. When I start to think about these songs and then I start to think about the album coming, kind of like what we were just talking about with Tears for Fears. You listen to the singles coming out. Makes me think back of the 80s. In the 80s, Motley Crue, Poison, Whitesnake, those type of bands would put out a really heavy rocker to bring in the guys, to bring in the diehards. And then right after that, it would be the power ballad to actually sell records, to actually sell 45s or cassette singles or CDs. There was a pattern. But you knew for the most part, they're going to put their best feet forward over those first two or three singles. Now, back then, by the time the second single hit, the album was already out. Now, in the current day and age of Spotify and iTunes, we're getting 3 or 4, even 5 releases before the album, the digital release, the vinyl, yes, even the CD gets put on Amazon or out there somewhere, hopefully, where you can find it. Of course, you can't buy physical music anymore for the most part, unless you want to go back to vinyl. Can't go to Walmart, can't go to Target. So, coming back from my tangent, I'm looking at Black Summer kind of in concert with the new release Poster Child. I liked Black Summer. Looking at it as a lead-off single, I thought, okay, this is a safe, typical Red Hot Chili Peppers type song. I liked it. It was catchy. But in the back of my mind, something was saying, okay, you better give me something different, something a little bit more creative, something with a little bit more of an edge for your second release. And then we get Poster Child. Poster Child now makes me worry. Because now I take Poster Child after listening to Black Summer and I'm thinking the Chili Peppers are out of gas. Because taking both the songs together, I'm looking at them and I'm saying Neither one of these technically is really original or creative. It sounds like warmed over Red Hot Chili Peppers B-sides. Again, I was expecting the big right forearm after the jab. Black Summer was the jab, got my attention, and then I was expecting the right cross to really knock me on my butt and say, "We're back." No, no. And I'm going to say this is going to be the first of two times here on Breakdown. I'm going to say this. Don't get offended. Don't send me messages saying I don't know what I'm talking about or I'm not listening close enough. I prefer my singers in my lyrics to be coherent. Okay? A lot of people I've seen in reviews of Poster Child have said that this is kind of like the Red Hot Chili Peppers version of Billy Joel's We Didn't Start the Fire. Of course, where Billy Joel rattled off pop culture touchstone, political touchstone, just on and on and on. And somehow he formed them, made them rhyme, formed them into a big hit song. Here's the problem. Anthony Kiedis, and I know the Red Hot Chili Peppers are in the Rock Hall of Fame, and I'll tell you right now, that's garbage. There are plenty of other bands, including two or three performers up for it this year that should have been in ahead of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I don't hate the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I like them, but they get far more credit than they deserve for being edgy and dangerous. Ooh, they meld rock and rap and funk. There's a lot of other bands that do that. And I think that drills down to why I'm not a big fan of Poster Child. Anthony Kiedis is sitting there mumbling, supposedly again, pop culture references left and right. I couldn't understand what the heck he was saying. And I don't want to look at a lyric sheet because I can't understand what the lead singer is babbling about. And we know Kiedis has done this in the past with other songs. Oh, listen to him. He's rapping, he's riffing, he's cool. I want to hear my singers enunciating, at least trying to sing somewhat clearly when I'm listening to their music. And it seems like we've become the ADD society because now there's commercials out there about people that, well, we have to have our subtitles on our movies all the time because we can't understand what they're saying. And I think that's a problem on both sides, not only the performers, but the audience. Whether it be actors and actresses or musicians, lead singers, whether it be lazy people at home who are too distracted by their phones. I just want to hear my singers come close to actually singing the words so I can understand them. And I know we can go back throughout decades and decades of lyrics where people make fun. Jimi Hendrix, Purple Haze. Excuse me while I kiss this guy. I get it. It's fun and games. I tend to take my music more seriously. I want to understand the lyrics. Yes, I know there's a purpose for the lyric sheets, and I am a fanatic about, again, buying the physical music, the album, the CD to get the liner notes, to get the lyrics. But I shouldn't have to wonder through 80% of the song what the lead singer is saying. That being said, I'm not a big fan of Poster Child. It's okay. Like I said, it's warmed over Red Hot Chili Peppers. And now, in retrospect, it makes me worry about Black Summer. And it makes me worry about what's coming from Unlimited Love. Red Hot Chili Peppers are starting to sound like a band believing their own hype, cruising on their reputation, not taking any chances anymore. Now, speaking of somebody who is still taking chances, somebody who I have criticized in the past, but still admire for the wacky, nutsy, cuckoo, crazy stuff he does, the energy he puts into rock and roll. Not only his music, but his record label, Third Man, and how he is trying his best, along with Dave Grohl of the Foo Fighters, to keep active and keep busy and keep rock and roll alive. Jack White. The A and B sides, technically A and B sides of his new single. Once again, digital age, so take A and B sides for what you will. Heidi Ho with Q-Tip is the A side of the latest Jack White single. The B side is Queen of the Bees. It would be hard for you to find two more dissimilar styles than these two songs. Now, here's the rub for my review of this. I can't say I loved either style, either side of this single, but I also found bits and pieces in each to really enjoy. Especially Heidi Ho. Heidi Ho is not, to me, a fully formed musical idea, but there is a hook in there. There is a catchy riff in there that emerges about a minute and a half, a minute and 45 seconds in. A buddy of mine told me he listened to it and he said, that's an earworm. The whole song itself, really, who knows? Not great, but that hook, that riff that Jack White has gotten Heidi Ho, it'll dig itself into your brain and won't let go. So again, I'm really looking forward to Fear of the Dawn, his first of two albums coming out here in about 3 weeks, beginning of April. And then the B side, as I mentioned, completely, totally different in terms of style. Queen of the Bees sounds like Jack White trying to do a Depression era song, maybe something from the 40s, a little bit later on. And anybody who's listened to the White Stripes knows he loves to do this. He loves to take these gambles, these musical tangents, and that's what makes listening to him fun. I'll never admit or commit to Jack White as one of my favorite musical acts of all time, because that's the risk you take. We talked about U2. in segment one. U2 took tons of risks after they became popular. And for me, they fell flat on their face. Zeropa Pop were terrible albums and destroyed, in my opinion, U2's reputation. Eventually, they tried to come back. Some of the stuff they put out was pretty good. But to me, they never achieved the greatness that they had back over their first 4 or 5 albums. I've mentioned Jack White, how I still think, even though Meg White was not really a necessary part of the White Stripes, just like with Sting and the Police, Meg White did something to rein Jack White in just enough, where most of the stuff he put out with the White Stripes was phenomenal. Ever since he went off on his own, to me, his solo career has been hit and miss. I think he's better with the Raconteurs. Again, a band, people around him to stabilize him, to rein him in. But what I'm hearing from Fear of the Dawn, even these 2 songs, as schizophrenic as Heidi Ho and Queen of the Bees, makes me wonder if this couldn't be Jack White finally finding his footing as a solo artist. Fingers crossed, let's hope. So that'll do it for Breakdown. Up next, as always, time to look back at rock history. Got some great stuff to discuss this week. I'll have to admit, most of it is personal favorites. But we'll throw a couple items and tidbits in there to appeal to all the old school rock and roll fans out there going back to the early 70s and even the 60s. So hang on, stay tuned. The Fortress of Rock will be right back. All right, now that we've looked at the current state of music in our breakdown segment, it is time to climb into the DeLorean and travel back in time to look back at moments in rock and roll history, birthdays, deaths, anniversaries of song and album releases. It is time for I Wanna Go Back, our tribute to Eddie Money. Stay tuned. And as always, we're on Spotify, Anchor, Apple, Stitcher, Castbox, Google, Pocket Cast, and Radio Public, anywhere where you listen to your favorite podcasts. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fortress of Rock. I am the Maestro, Kevin Crane, taping here on the 18th of March, 2022. Episode 31 overall. Glad to have you aboard. Of course, big sports weekend. March Madness is in full effect. So hopefully, those of you who are big college basketball fans can tear yourselves away at some point this weekend for an hour and a half and listen to me and the latest in rock and roll news. Of course, as always, segment 3, I want to go back. Of course, referencing the great Eddie Money. Our anniversaries of classic album releases, moments in rock history, birthdays, deaths, the moments that we need to look back on as touchstones, as rock and roll fans, the moments that really matter for us. And this is the point in time where I usually give credit, as I always do, to my sources for a lot of these ideas. Ultimate Classic Rock, thisdayinmusic.com, the Van Halen News Desk. Yes, the opinions are mine and mine alone, so don't hold them accountable for how the Maestro feels. Let's start off with some anniversaries, as I mentioned in the last segment. We're going to go back in time. Old school rock and roll first. But we'll start off on this day, March the 18th, in 2017. And unfortunately, on this day in 2017, we lost one of the founding fathers of rock and roll, the great Chuck Berry, passed away. We all have our opinions about rock and roll. We all have our personal bands, who we love, people who we don't like, who we think are overrated, underrated. And a fun game that people like to play is Mount Rushmore. Who would be the four people you would put on Mount Rushmore for this or for that? The greatest quarterbacks of all time, the greatest movie stars of all time. For me, rock and roll, you'd have to do two. You'd have to do two different Mount Rushmores. You would have to do the founding fathers, and then, of course, your personal favorites. There are people out there that would put all four Beatles on Mount Rushmore, and you can tell right away those people are not true rock and roll fans. And I've found that more often than not with Beatles fans to be the case. And I'm sure there's Led Zeppelin fans that would do it, Rolling Stones fans that would do it, but above all, Beatles fans are so fanatical, especially now with, again, another resurgence in interest in the Fab Four with Peter Jackson's ungodly long, ungodly boring documentary, Get Back. When I think of Chuck Berry, I would put him as one of those founding fathers of rock and roll on my Mount Rushmore. Again, not personal Mount Rushmore. Of course, Eddie Van Halen is going to be up on mine. You'd have to give me more time to really think about who the other three would be. And no, it would not all be Van Halen. It wouldn't be Eddie, Alex, Dave, and Mikey. Although that would be pretty awesome. But I love more than just Van Halen. I respect music altogether. So let me put this out there for you. You can send me a message, check out the Facebook page, put a comment on this podcast episode posting when it gets there here in a few hours. Who would be your Mount Rushmore of the founding fathers or women of rock and roll? And I'll be honest, I'm not a guy who really digs deep into the history of rock and roll. I don't go back really farther than the Beatles. But I'm aware of what performers like Chuck Berry did to lay the foundation so the Beatles could happen, so Zeppelin could happen, so the Stones and the Who could happen, so Van Halen and Aerosmith could happen. So I would probably go Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley, maybe Bill Haley and Buddy Holly. You can tell I'm not 100% firm on that. I think Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley for sure make the cut. I could probably be convinced to change Buddy Holly and Bill Haley. I mean, if we're gonna go, we could go with Wilson Pickett. I mean, there are plenty out there that we could discuss who would be the founding fathers on Mount Rushmore in terms of the people that laid the foundation for rock and roll? Think about it. Interesting discussion. Of course, we've talked about the Beatles here, so we should mention that on this day, March the 18th, in 1967, the double-sided hit Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever became the Beatles' 13th number one single in the United States. I've made no bones about the fact that I don't like the Beatles' psychedelic era at all. The Beatles, again, I think this is why people have built this mythology about them. The first isn't always the best, but the Beatles changed gears, shifted tone so much from 1964 to 1970. They did in that short period of time what other bands did over 30 or 40 years. Because back then you had to put out multiple albums every year. You had to tour, record, tour, record. Now, the Beatles didn't do a lot of touring, but damn, did they record a lot of music from 64 to 70. And that's why I still look at them as not my favorite band of all time, but I will still agree that they are the greatest, most influential rock and roll band of all time. Again, not personally. I'm talking about rock and roll history. I personally think the Stones are better. I think the Beatles are better than Zeppelin. I know, I can hear some of you gasping in the audience. I think the Beatles and the Who, that's a neck and neck discussion. But Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane, interesting that they paired those two songs together on this single. To me, Penny Lane is one of their stronger songs. A little bit wistful, nostalgic. Kind of reminded me of the early Beatles. And then, of course, you've got the psychedelic stuff of Strawberry Fields Forever, which I just, again, cannot stand. And people have so many different takes on the Beatles. Even to this day, it's amazing. I still talk to people about the Beatles here in 2022. And I always say I liked them early on, hated them in the middle, and I kind of liked them more at the end. And then there's other people who can't stand Hey Jude that I know, which I think is still one of their best songs. Those people kind of prefer the earlier poppy stuff. Then there's people that just think the psychedelic era, the Sgt. Pepper's, Yellow Submarine stuff was just unbelievable. Of course, we all know Sgt. Pepper's is considered one of the greatest albums of all time. I'll pass on that. Thanks. But again, Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever hit number one in the US on this day in 1967. And I will acknowledge, even though I can't stand him, we've been talking about him ad nauseum lately because of his little Spotify tirade, which did you notice that lasted about all of 3 weeks before now? Nobody's talking about boycotting Spotify anymore. Yes, I'm talking about Neil Young. In 1972, on this date, Heart of Gold hit number one in the US. Okay, decent song. Probably his third best song after Rockin' in the Free World and Cinnamon Girl. And you're talking to somebody who doesn't like Neil Young at all. The hidden appeal, I think, of Heart of Gold is Linda Ronstadt singing background vocals, and you can hear her. She has got such a strong voice, especially back then. But like Neil Young, she's a cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs West Coast liberal nut job. So there you go. Birthdays. I'm going to cheat a little bit here, and usually I like to stick with the day I'm recording the podcast only. But I have to go back here a couple days ago to the 15th of March for Dee Snider's birthday. Of course, Dee Snider of Twisted Sister was born on March 15th back in 1955, this past week. Happy birthday to Dee Snider. Now, Dee Snider and Twisted Sister, of course, had a couple fantastic videos on MTV. Brilliant videos. Personally, even though I love 80s metal, hard rock, I was never a huge Twisted Sister guy. I respected them. Learning now what I have about Twisted Sister and Dee Snider and what they had to go through and how they were actually a quote unquote older band that finally broke as opposed to some of the younger guys, I do respect Dee a little bit more. So happy birthday to Dee Snider. A couple days belated, but still. Also, the same day, March the 15th, a big day for hair metal. Back in 1963, Bret Michaels of Poison was born. So Bret is now 59, using my shaky math. And I always base all these looking at when I was born and adding on or taking away a couple years. That's how I usually figure out how old these guys are. Of course, mentioned it earlier, Poison. Finally, the stadium tour with Motley Crue, Joan Jett, and Def Leppard will happen this year. COVID be damned. I've seen Poison many, many times over my life. I think this will be the fifth time, if not the sixth. They're a fun band to see in concert. You need to see them at least once. They don't change their set list this day and age that much anymore. It's usually just the hits. They'll throw some pyro in there. I will say this. They look phony. You might think Bret Michaels is phony. Of course, with the bandana, the way they act, the way they behave. But I would actually pose to you that they are one of the most sincere rock and roll bands out there. I think what you see is what you get. Yeah, they're a little bit full of themselves, but they also have kind of gracefully accepted as much as you can when you used to be 80s hair metal icons. They've gracefully accepted to a point who they are now. I think that's why the original foursome got back together and have stuck together now. Yeah, the paychecks are nice, but maybe they finally realized that that unit, that foursome, creates something different and something more special than the parts can do individually. You could say the same thing about Motley Crue, of course, going out on tour with them. Def Leppard, yeah, I think they might even be the poster children for rock and roll sincerity, but with what they've gone through, there's no way they could keep that unit together. Death, literal dismemberment, cancer. Thank God Vivian Campbell's doing good. I cannot wait. I'm glad that they added the Indianapolis date this year. They had to, of course, again, postpone that tour for years because of COVID. At least for me, selfishly, it all worked out. So I will get to see this quadruple bill. I've seen all four acts before, so I can just actually sit back and enjoy this. It's going to be fantastic. Speaking of somebody I am going to see this year, and it's very, very, very soon, March the 16th, 2 days ago. 31st birthday, happy birthday to Wolfgang Van Halen. Of course, I am ecstatic about the success he is having with Mammoth WVH. Don't want to push him, but boy, I could use another album here. If not late this year, early 2023. But this coming Monday, March the 21st, 2022, the Maestro will see the Young Guns tour with Mammoth WVH and Dirty Honey. I will have that review for you next week, next Friday on the Fortress of Rock. You do not want to miss that. This will be the second time I've seen Mammoth WVH, the first time opening for Guns N' Roses, where it felt like I was definitely a football field away, felt like I was half a mile away. Now, this show will be different. This show, I should be pretty much within 15 feet. So, vastly different perspective. Looking forward to it. Then finally, here to wrap up, I want to go back. We'll actually do a birthday that's happening today, March the 18th. Somebody from the grunge era, still going strong today, who I respect and admire. Jerry Cantrell, both solo and as a member of Alice in Chains. 1 year younger than me. Damn it. Makes me feel old. He's 56 today. Born in 1966. Of course, I've always said that grunge era to me was the last great era of rock and roll. We're going on 20 plus years now where nobody's really stepped up to create a new movement, a new sound for rock and roll. And I hope and pray that the grunge era from the mid to late 90s was not the last great music era. Sorry, I'm not counting hip hop, I'm not counting emo, I'm not counting screamo. Unfortunately, just like our viewpoints in politics and society and culture. It's fractured, and I don't know if and when we'll ever get it back. But happy birthday to Jerry Cantrell. Hoping to get some new Alice in Chains. Of course, they're going out on tour with Breaking Benjamin and Bush. And, of course, Jerry Cantrell put out his third solo album last year. So that'll do it for our look back at moments in rock history. Hang out for just a few more minutes. As always, segment 4 is where we wrap it up. And I'll tell you what to look forward to in the coming weeks here on the Fortress of Rock. We'll be right back. Well, we hope you enjoyed our trip back in time, looking back at the anniversaries, the classic moments in rock and roll history. But of course, the DeLorean works both ways. So now we have to move forward. The last segment here, as always, on the Fortress of Rock with me, the Maestro Kevin Crane. Spotify, Anchor, Apple, Stitcher, Castbox, Google, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. It's all about the future. What's coming out here in the next month or two? What songs? What albums? What concert tours? That's why we call it Wrap It Up. Thanks to the fabulous Thunderbirds. Thanks to you for hanging out. Here comes our final segment. All right, it's time to close the books on another episode of The Fortress of Rock. March the 18th, 2022, episode 31. Available Spotify, Anchor, Google, Radio Public, Pocket Cast, Breaker, Apple, Overcast, Castbox, Stitcher, wherever you listen to your other favorite podcasts, besides, of course, this one. So coming up here in the next few weeks, I mentioned we push back one more time Joe Satriani's new single, Faceless. Gonna hold off for another week on Black Keys, the new Black Keys single, Wild Child, and the new Joan Jett single, I'm Gonna Run Away. I will do my best to get those in next week. Of course, the number one review we're going to have for you next week, as I just mentioned, is the Young Guns, Mammoth, WVH, and Dirty Honey live in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I will be there. Next Friday, I will have my review. We will also review the new Bryan Adams album, So Happy It Hurts. New songs that have just been released here over the last couple days. We're going to probably hold off on those for a couple weeks to give me enough time to review them properly so I can listen to them 10 or 12 times, give you a fair and honest review. We mentioned Def Leppard, the new single Kick just came out yesterday. The third release of what we're hearing is a new album from The Fix, Closer, and one of my personal favorite bands. One of these bands that I will push and pimp, just like last week, where I couldn't get enough of telling you about Rival Sons. I was like this about 4 or 5 years ago with the Black Moods. Black Moods just released a new song, Saturday Night. So next week, I am planning on Bryan Adams, Black Keys, Joe Satriani, Joan Jett, and the concert review. 2 weeks from now, I will give you Def Leppard, The Fix, the Black Moods, and of course, whatever new stuff pops up, We will figure out a way to slot it in for you. I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend wherever you are, near and far, US, UK, all across the globe. Weather's getting better here where we are, as I mentioned. Sun is starting to shine more. Temps are going up. Of course, that means summer concerts, summer album releases, optimism. With all the bad things happening in the world, we always have rock and roll to keep our spirits up. Keep that in mind. Keep your chin up. Keep in touch with your friends, your family. Tell them you love them. We love you here on the Fortress of Rock. Thank you as always for tuning in. I'm the Maestro, Kevin Crane. We will check you out, as always, next Friday night.